What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to let you know before the start of this video that this is the Sunday compilation video. What that means is that this video is a compilation of all the other stories I've read so far this week, just in case you missed them or you didn't have time or whatever it may be. They're in the form of a longer video, so if you want to listen to it in the background or while you go to sleep or something, you can do that easily. There's a whole playlist of them in the description. All the ads in this video will be after the first 2 or 3 stories, and then after that in the video, there will be no more ads. So I hope you guys enjoy the video, and thank you guys so much for watching. So I play amateur football here in Montana, and I played for a couple of different teams now. This one game I played back in 2014 though, ended really badly for me. I ended up getting my bell rung, which is bad enough, but when I woke up and tried to move, what I can only describe as the worst pain in my life shot up through my leg. I heard one of the guys near me say something like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, dude, look at his leg." I knew it must have been pretty bad, but what I didn't realize is that it was a complete compound fracture that would take more than a year to fully heal. My tibia had torn right out through the meat of my skin, meaning I needed to be rushed into surgery or I might actually have lost my leg. Then, once that whole process was out of the way, I needed some serious rehab in order to get back on my feet. I put on a bunch of weight, ended up getting hooked on pain meds for a while, which was a whole nother drama, and basically became a totally different person over the course of about 6 or 7 months. It was probably my lowest point in my life so far, and I knew it was going to be a hard road to get back to playing football again. My first goal though was to lose all that weight and gain back the strength in my legs. For that, I needed some harder forms of training. Trouble was, I was feeling seriously embarrassed getting back in the gym, which I know is kind of a dumb issue that's completely in my own head, but it felt pretty real to me at the time. Instead, I opted for another kind of exercise to get back into shape, and that was hiking. My hiking spot of choice ended up being this one particular trail in the Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, which is about 30 miles south of my hometown of Butte. So I drive on down to this little town called the Wise River, park my truck near this awesome little saloon whose owner I was pretty friendly with. Then I tried hiking up to Round Top Mountain, getting further and further to the summit every try. Between the buck and change in weight that I put on and my weak shins, it was absolute agony at first. I even remember this one time, I was sitting down on a log on the side of the trail, pouring Advil down my neck, and feeling like a piece of trash. When I looked up the trailway, I saw this log cabin sitting there on the ridgeline, looking all lofty and king-like, staring out over the valley. I told myself, I'm going to make it up to you one day, and when I do, I'm gonna drink from my water bottle like it's full of champagne. That became my goal over the summer, to make it all the way up to that cabin on the ridge. Surely by that point, my leg would be back to normal, and I'd be back to my usual 190 pounds. That was me for almost the whole month of July, hiking up Round Top at least twice a week, and feeling it get a bit easier each time as well. Then, one day, I finally did it. My God, seeing that cabin up close and personal came with a feeling of pure elation. Only thing was, I'd completely sank the contents of my water bottle by the time I'd reached it, and since it would be another hour of hike back to my truck, I figured I might as well see if the owners had an outside faucet or something I could use to fill up. So I start walking up the trail, then turn off to walk up the path that leads to the cabin. As soon as I got within earshot, I could hear someone singing on the inside. That was kind of a relief in itself, to know someone was home, and I'd definitely at least get some water. I wasn't worried if I'd be welcome or not, as someone singing that loud to themselves, what sounded like a happy tune, I doubted they'd be grumpy enough to turn away a stranger for just asking for water, especially on such a hot day. I got right up close to the front door of the cabin. The man inside was still singing a song. I looked it up later, and it was from a Jerry Lee Lewis song called She Even Woke Me Up to Say Goodbye. The way the guy was singing was all loud and stuff. He was either in a sort of good mood or really drunk. Probably both if I had to guess. Next thing I know, I knock on the guy's door and announce myself. He didn't respond in any way, so I figured he might have earbuds or headphones on or something. The door to the cabin was slightly ajar, something I'd only noticed after already knocking. So while half praying that he didn't freak out or shoot me or something, I edged the door open to look inside, maybe give him a wave to let him know I was there. So I pushed the door open, and I see the little kitchen and dining room is empty, with the singing coming from the bedroom now. Somehow, the guy still hadn't heard me, but that made sense, considering the whole place stunk of strong booze. I could tell there was something else in the air though, something that smelled almost metallic. Before I had a chance to truly think about what that might mean, the owner of the cabin appeared shirtless from the bedroom area, carrying a jug of what looked like moonshine or some other kind of home brew. What surprised me was that he was not drinking it though. He was splashing it all over the floor for some reason. When he locked eyes with me, he had this oh crap kind of look on his face that made me instantly nervous. As I was starting to back out of the open doorway, I noticed why he'd look so frightened about being disturbed. In the corner of that small room he'd emerged from, there was a woman sitting slumped on the floor with her back to the wall. Above her, coating the wall, was a smatter of blood, like she'd slid down the wall after being shot or something. I turned to run, not even thinking about it. I knew I needed to get out of there. Instead of running the way I came though, which would have made me an easy shot should the guy pull a gun or something, I went running through the trees at the side of the house for more cover. Keep in mind, I couldn't run properly at this stage in my healing. My shin was hollering at me something fierce. If I had gone off running the way of the trail, the man would have been able to just line up his sights and shoot me down like fish in a barrel. My fears were confirmed when I heard a gunshot ring out behind me. That really got rid of the pain in my leg almost instantly. Adrenaline is one heck of a drug as it turns out. I almost went tumbling down the slopes a bunch of times. I think I skidded down on my butt for most of it, but eventually I got to a point where I felt safe enough to pull out my cell phone and call 911. I was able to tell the cops about the body and the shot I thought had been fired at me. The guy looked like he was about to burn the place down, so they better get there quick. Then again, there was no fast way of getting up a steep hill like Round Top, so by the time the cops got there, the place was fully ablaze. I think that was the case anyway. I mean, I could see the smoke rising all the way from my car when I'd hiked back down. After I drove back home, I only got the full story when the cops came to talk to me about what exactly I'd seen. Turns out the guy had gone through his wife's phone or something and found out she was cheating, flew into a rage and blasted her. Only what I didn't see was that he'd shot his 2 kids too, and he'd stacked their bodies on the bed before dousing the place with what the cops believed was some kind of homemade liqueur. The sound of the shot wasn't him coming out to take a shot at me. He'd walked outside his burning cabin and shot himself in the face right out front. That was the shot I'd heard, the one that made me run like hell. It made for a real open and shut case from what I can tell. Not much to investigate, not many questions to ask. Just a whole lot of insaneness that's better left forgotten about, I suppose. But then again, what if you can't forget about it? What if every time I look south up at the hills, I think about the way he was just singing to himself after he took his whole family's lives? I just don't get why he wanted to make them victims of a situation that was so messed up to begin with. How can a person feel that entitled to the lives of their own children? Like I said, I think I've come to the depressing conclusion that good things are mostly fleeting. Then, seeing something like I did up there on Round Top, those bad things I was talking about, they have a habit of staying with you for much longer than anyone would like them to. One of the worst days of my life started when me and a hiking buddy of mine came across this run-down old hunting cabin out in the woods. I mean, it was so shabby looking that we couldn't have imagined it being anything but abandoned, so we didn't see any harm in exploring it a little bit before we moved back onto the trail we'd been wandering down. We walk inside, start looking around, only to see that it didn't look abandoned at all. The stove had clearly been in use sometime within the last day or so, as it still smelled like burning wood. There were food wrappers strewn about, with what looked like some torn open first aid supplies as well. Someone had definitely been there recently. Instead of continuing our little trespassing, we decided to move on instead of risking making the owner angry or whatever. Then though, that's when we heard this really faint noise coming from somewhere. Something that sounded an awful lot like a person's voice. I looked at my buddy. "You hear that?" We both stood real still for a second and strained our ears, only to hear a distinct "help me" coming from beneath us. This hit us like a ton of bricks. We started looking around for some kind of hatch or something, and ended up finding the opening to a root cellar outside. We opened it up, only to find some random guy covered in blood, with what we thought was a gunshot or stab wound to one of his legs. We asked the guy what happened, and his reply was honestly one of the most haunting things I've ever heard in my entire life. "You have to help me. He'll be back soon." Jesus, dude, it was like something out of a horror movie. Like that stomach-dropping moment, you realize that the main characters have just stumbled upon a world of trouble. Only this time we were the main characters, and this wasn't some dumb story with a happy ending. It was real, and we had no idea what to do. We kept on asking him, "Who'll be back? Who did this to you?" But the man kept begging us to get him out of the cellar. Obviously, that was the first thing we did, as he basically answered our questions in the way that he was all messed up and obviously scared of whoever was coming back. We helped him out of that cellar, got one of his arms over each of our shoulders, and helped him limp down the trail back towards where we'd first walked onto it. No one ever caught up with us or anything. The person who had shot or stabbed him never rounded the trail behind us, but my God, the whole time I was checking everything, expecting some knife-wielding psycho to emerge from the woods intent on killing us. We managed to flag down a truck that was passing down one of the main roads that ran through the park. The guy inside was nice enough to rush the dude to the hospital, even though he'd gotten blood all over the upholstery. Turns out the guy survived, and the person who had attacked him was his hunting buddy, who had snapped after some kind of trivial argument. It's crazy that someone would do something like that to a person they called a friend, but I guess weirder things have happened. Definitely the scariest thing that's ever happened to me while out on a hike. My buddy says the same thing too. It was that line of "he'll be back soon" that I'll never forget so. It was so eerie it had me trembling with fear as we rushed to help this guy get to safety. Sometimes I wonder just how close the guy chasing him actually was. Maybe if we'd been a bit earlier or later, the guy who'd done it might have done the same thing to us just to keep us quiet. So back when me and my brother were fairly young, our parents weren't exactly well off. Mom had been out of regular work for more than 2 years due to the childbirths and needing to take care of us, and Dad was still basically at entry level for his career. Because they worked so hard on carving out life for us as a family though, they were in dire need of a vacation. Only thing was that because of our financial situation, it had to be a real budget vacation. Which is how they found a cheap log cabin in the Cascades that was available for just over $100 a week. From what they'd told us, it wasn't like one of those too good to be true kind of deals either. There wasn't anything remotely suspicious about that place, though it was rough around the edges. From what the owner told them, it was quiet, secluded, and well off the beaten path. The perfect place to get some peace and quiet, away from the hustle and bustle of Seattle. I think all it took was making sure it was safe for kids, ensuring there were no bodies of water around or anything. Then they went ahead and booked it for 5 days in June or July. I was really into animals and nature stuff back then. Still am really. My brother was a pretty chill kid, so they could have taken him anywhere and he'd have found something to keep himself occupied. When we arrived at the cabin, we were both pretty excited with these new surroundings. Even if it meant we had to share a bed in a small rustic-looking one-room cabin. We didn't care if it was too small or if it was in the middle of nowhere. It was like a real adventure to us at that age. Being so immersed in nature was something I particularly found really exciting. The first day we arrived in the early afternoon, I remember running around the cabin with my mom before she took my brother and I out to explore the surrounding area. We had a small dinner that my dad cooked on the stove with the groceries we'd bought. Then we ended up playing board games until it was time for bed. Everything was really good for the first day. It was only during the night that I noticed something seemed to be off. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to find that my dad was out of bed and over by the small window near the cabin's front door. Mom was sat up as well, whispering to him in the low light. My brother was fast asleep as I asked them what was wrong and why Dad was out of bed. I remember them both kind of jumping when I spoke. I guess I'd surprised them. They told me Dad couldn't sleep. The bed was too small or something, and he was letting Mom get some sleep before he went to bed himself. I remember thinking that was kind of a weird explanation. The bed looked plenty big for me. At that age, kids just kind of take their parents' word for stuff like that though, don't they? As they continued to whisper to each other in the darkness, I went back to sleep. The next morning, Mom and Dad were sat at the table, looking all worried and stressed out about something. I could tell something was wrong even at that age, but I was still excited to be on vacation. I was definitely excited to get back into the great outdoors to try and spot some animals. I asked if I could play outside, and my parents said it was okay, just as long as I didn't go anywhere near where they couldn't see me from the window. If I couldn't see the window myself, I'd already gone too far. That's what they told me. I opened the cabin door, walked outside, and on the edge of the porch was what looked like a little figurine. It was shaped like a tiny little man. It looked to me like it had been carved out of wood or something. I remember picking it up and playing with it for a little while, making the little guy run through the grass and jump out onto logs and stuff. Next thing I know, I saw one sitting on the hood of my mom and dad's car as well. Naturally, I ran over to grab that one too. Now I had 2 little stick men to play with. I was in the middle of my little game when my brother came outside. He's older than me, and back then he was definitely more attuned to mom and dad's moods. He told me something was wrong with them. They seemed worried or sad about something. That made me sad too. This was supposed to be a happy vacation for us all. An adventure, just like they'd said. I remember it being much harder to have fun after that, knowing my mom and dad were worried about something. Still, I showed my brother the new toys and invited him to play along with me. I gave him one of the little figurines. Then he kept asking to play with the other one too. It wasn't long before an unimportant childish scuffle started between he and I. He attempted to wrestle the little figurine out of my hand. It didn't take long before I started to cry, which prompted our mom and dad to come running out of the cabin at the sound. I don't remember them running out with any particular urgency, but years later they told us that sound terrified them in the moment, especially in light of what had happened the night before. They asked what we were fighting over, and that's how they discovered the little white figurines we'd been playing with. Right then, my dad took them from my brother, and he immediately started asking us, "Where did you get these? Tell me where they were." He was so angry that my brother started crying too. He pointed at me and said that it was me that had found them. I was already upset, but I remember getting even more upset when I realized we might get in trouble for having played with them. I told my mom and dad exactly where I'd found them. They'd just been sitting right there. I hadn't stolen them or taken them from someone else or anything. It seemed totally harmless to me, just playing with little wood-carved figures. I had no idea they weren't made of wood at all. Next thing I remember, Mom and Dad rushed us back into the cabin. then weirdly changed their approach as they reassured us we weren't in any trouble. Mom proceeded to comfort my brother and I. I noticed my dad was now packing all our stuff back into our suitcases at 100 miles per hour. He was the same way, making sure to put on a brave face as he got ready to get us out of there. Then they explained to us they had to take us home early because Dad needed to get back to work or something. I can't remember the exact excuse. They promised it wasn't because we'd done anything bad though. We could continue playing in the backyard when we got home. I asked if we could take the little figures with us. Both of them almost snapped at me, saying no at the same time. Within maybe 10 or 15 minutes, we were back in the car driving back to Seattle again, with this real tense mood in the car as we drove. It was pretty tense for the rest of the day. Then, Mom took us into the small backyard we had and told us we'd have our very own little nature play session right there. It was only a small backyard, but we still had fun watching the birds. Then we had a little picnic. All the trouble back at the cabin was forgotten about amongst my brother and I. So, cut to like 20 years later. It's during the holiday, and me and my brother had come home for Christmas dinner. We were sitting around reminiscing in the TV room, talking about this and that, when my brother suddenly brought up the aborted cabin vacation from when we were kids. He hadn't forgotten about the two little figures either, and why Mom and Dad had seemingly got so weirdly mad about me finding them. My mom and dad just gave each other this look. My mom shook her head and covered her face with her hands, like she couldn't bear to remember the whole thing. And that's when my dad told the actual story of what happened back then. So as they were drifting off to sleep that night, Dad had heard someone moving around outside the cabin. Not just like walking by casually either. The footsteps were slow and careful, like whoever was making them didn't want to be found. That's how Dad ended up peering out the window so late at night. Although I hadn't seen at the time, he'd had his old kitchen knife in his hand, just waiting for someone to burst through the door. That had scared them both pretty badly, but they didn't want to just bail on the vacation they'd already paid for, the one they both felt they needed so badly. They were of two minds about it though. They decided to stay one more night, just to make sure it wasn't some kids messing around or something. If it happened again, we were just going to leave, but they didn't even get that far. Right around the same time they were discussing this, the incident with the little figurines happened. They weren't made of wood at all. They were figurines made from bones. I'm not going to pretend to know what kind of bone or animal they came from. God forbid they came from a person or whatever, but like I said, my dad was smart enough to recognize the texture and realized that whoever had been outside the previous night must have left them there for some reason. I mean, you don't leave bone figures on someone's porch as a welcome gift, do you? Not in the middle of the night anyway. Instead of sticking around like they'd thought they might, they just said, let's get out of there. My dad figured he could protect the family from some lone peeping Tom or something, but from someone who carved stuff out of bone to leave as a warning, that wasn't someone you wanted to go up against in the middle of nowhere. Personally, I think that was a smart move myself, and I respect them for making the hard decision they had to. This all started a couple of days ago, about July 5th or so. I'd get a random call from FedEx around 10 p.m., where they asked me for my name and my address, which they already knew. I gave it to them, thinking it might be a package that was lost, and somehow found its way back to my home. In hindsight, I should have known FedEx doesn't deliver past 8 p.m. here in Canada. I didn't think anything of it though, until I got another phone call from them, saying they couldn't find my unit number. They asked me to come out to the roundabout nearby my place. My dad immediately thought this was really weird, so he patrolled the area to find these people. My dad did around 4 laps. The first lap, there wasn't anything there. Then, though, I got curious and joined him for the second one. Yet again, nothing. My dad did a third lap around the house, only to find a gray SUV hiding in the corner. He went and confronted them. They told my dad they weren't the delivery person, and my dad left to do another confirmation check. As he was doing that last lap, though, the same SUV was no longer there. The next day, July 6th, around 6 to 11 p.m., we heard a doorbell ringing. I went down to check, and it was two people I didn't know, around the ages of 20 or so, I'd say. They knew my name, though, and one of them was calling out for me. Again, this was extremely strange, as I'd never seen them before. I didn't feel safe, so I didn't pursue them or try to talk to them. They kept coming over and over again, though, so we called the police soon after and talked about what steps we could take. The cops told me to contact them if this happened again. The next day, July 7th, it was very quiet and nothing weird happened. We thought the worst had ended because of this and went about with our business as usual. On the next day, though, it was that same quietness. When the time approached 11 p.m., my security camera spotted an individual with a mask, seemingly taking photos or videos of our house. That was the breaking point. We contacted the police and informed them about this suspicious behavior. Just when we'd thought it was finally over, I was casually in the living room around 3 a.m. the same day. Suddenly, I heard a thunking outside on my balcony. I thought it could really be anything. I didn't mind it too much until I heard that sound once again. I went to the balcony to see what I was hearing, and then it clicked. I was face to face with an intruder. I started screaming for help. My family ran down to check out the commotion. Thank God I checked the sound that day. Who knows what else could have happened if I just chalked it up to an animal or something. Today is July 9th, and I haven't got a wink of sleep, thinking of the terror that I've been facing. Am I one of the targets of a home invasion? How'd they get my name in the first place? And why are they doing this to me? Update. So the house was lit on fire. I repeat, our house was lit on fire. Thankfully, we're all safe, but the police told me they threw a Molotov through the window or something. I really don't know what's going on, but if I have any further updates, I'll be sure to let you know. Before I begin this story, just want to let you guys know it does have some animal suffering in it, so go ahead and skip to the next story if you don't like that sort of thing. Otherwise, we'll get started now. Every fall, I take my family and I out to a cabin up in the woods in Maine. Don't let the whole cabin in the woods thing fool you though. It's a very bougie kind of experience, and although my kids would roll their eyes at me using that word, I don't think they'd be quite so pleased with the place if it wasn't for how upmarket it actually is. Has a hot tub outside, a full kitchen, pretty spectacular internet for rural Maine. But I think my favorite part has to be the cozy TV area with its fireplace and fancy sliding glass door. The glass doors face out west, and because the cabin is built in a clearing at the crest of a gentle slope, the sunsets are absolutely incredible. Paying for a hot tub is one thing, but seeing the way the setting sun lights up the red and orange leaves and makes them look like they're on fire, that's something money can't buy right there. By some horrid twist of fate, though, those sliding glass doors ended up being part of one of the scariest things I've ever seen with my own two eyes. They both protected us and presented us with a sight so horrifying, I don't think I can ever get it out of my mind. Every time we visit that luxurious log cabin up in Maine, it pops up into my mind like it just happened, and it's guaranteed to make me shudder. So we're gonna go back more than 10 years for this, all the way back to 2010. My daughter was still in middle school, and my son was only just out of diapers. Me and my wife had just put my son to bed, and my daughter was up in her room, playing that Nintendo thing we'd just gotten for her birthday. For the first time all that day, me and my wife were just enjoying each other's company in the TV room, watching the sunset and sharing a bottle of wine. We were gazing out the glass doors, silently basking in how much we'd overcome to be where we were now, when suddenly this dog walked into view. It looked like a mongrel of sorts, just lazily wandering into our view. It stopped and let its tongue loll out of its mouth in the way those dogs tend to do. My wife said something like, "Oh, look at that little guy. You think he's lost or something?" The dog seemed to hear her talking though, as it turned its head in our direction. And that's when I noticed there was something not quite right about this dog. Its ribs were showing clearly, which made me think it must be a stray. But then I noticed those flecks of white spittle around its mouth. Some was matted into the fur at the corner of its jaws even. My wife, being the kind-hearted soul that she is, asked if we should open the door and give the poor thing some food and a bowl of water, since she too thought it looked like a stray. She was halfway around to getting up off the couch when I put a hand on her thigh and told her to sit back down. At first, she acted like I was being some sort of Scrooge, not wanting to feed and water this starving animal. But when I told her the dog clearly had rabies, she suddenly understood why I didn't want to open those glass doors. After she sat back down, I took a closer look at the thing, just to make sure I wasn't being overly paranoid. As I took a step towards the glass though, the dog began baring its teeth and snarling so loud we could hear it through the thick glass of the doors. I immediately froze in fear, amazed that even though it looked like nothing more than a domesticated dog, its anger could have such a profound effect on me. It truly looked ferocious. I could tell it wanted to rip my throat out, and I realized how fortunate we are in that moment that most dogs have a friendly disposition, rather than antagonize any further. We tried to get away as far as possible, intending to find my phone and call animal control. The second I turned to show my back though, it began bounding towards us, something I never would have known if it wasn't for my wife shouting "Oh my God" at the top of her lungs. I turned around just in time to see the dog's face collide with the glass door. It made such an ungodly thudding sound that it makes my skin crawl just thinking about it today. The impact drew another frightened cry from my wife, which in turn had my daughter running into the room to see what was wrong. In that moment, my priority was getting my daughter out of there so she wouldn't have to see what was happening. It was extremely distressing, even for us grown adults, so I can only imagine how disturbing it would be to see for a child. There was a slight smear of blood on the glass, and the dog began walking in a dazed circle outside. My daughter began crying, and though I was sorry to do it, I yelled at her to get out of the room. My next priority was obviously animal control. I was never really afraid that the thing was going to break through the glass, certainly not after that first attempt, but after I dialed the operator and asked them to connect me with animal control, I watched in horror as the dog began to literally bite its way through the glass. It was raking its teeth against it, its fat, swollen tongue lolling out the whole time. That's when I realized it wasn't just hot or thirsty. Its tongue was so big it couldn't actually sit in its mouth properly. Blood was leaking out of it, with it smearing everywhere as it continued to try and bite its way through the glass. It looked furious, like it would attack us if it did manage to break through. At the same time, a look would come into its eyes every so often that to me looked like desperation. There was nothing we could do. I'm not the type to keep a gun in the house. All I could do was wait for animal control to call us back. They weren't picking up the phone immediately. Then we'd tell him where exactly we were and what condition we'd seen the dog in. It did wander off long before the call came. My wife had barely managed to calm down in that time. I can't say that I did a much better job calming down either. Like I said, it was one of the most horrifying things I'd ever been witness to. In the years that followed, my daughter became a huge fan of the TV show The Walking Dead. I was always surprised she didn't make the connection between the virus in that show and what she'd seen at the cabin that day. Naturally, we had to explain to her that the dog was rabid, how the disease works and how dangerous it is, and how she should learn to recognize the symptoms of such animals and never come near them. Personally, I find it very fascinating that people like her take an interest in a fictional zombie apocalypse and talk about it like it's an impossibility. We already have zombie viruses here on Earth, multiple of them. They actually exist. They can turn animals and even people into furious foam-frothing creatures that can pass their disease through their bites. You don't really have to imagine it. It's already here with us. I'll never forget that night. It was last year, and I had just turned 25. I had been to a friend's wedding in another state and was returning by train. I reached the station around 5 a.m. It was freezing outside, as the temperature had just hit 4 degrees. All I could think about was getting home fast, so I could sleep for hours after being tired for many nights. I generally avoid traveling home alone in the dark, but it was impossible to wait at the station all the way till sunrise. Even 1 hour seemed like it would be a very long time. I decided to call up a taxi. The distance from the station to my apartment was roughly 40 kilometers. There were 2 taxis, and I got into one of them without even making eye contact with the driver. I told him where I wanted to go, and we started. The man must have been in his late 50s or early 60s. Silver gray hair, big build. I decided to go with this taxi because I thought I'd be more safe with this fellow, since he was an elderly man. Clearly, that was a mistake. Nearly 15 to 20 minutes had passed. I was looking at the road ahead. There were very few cars out, and all I could see were trees close by. The fog covered everywhere else. Suddenly, I noticed that this guy had been staring at me from the rearview mirror. He didn't blink or look away when I looked at him either. It had been over 2 minutes, and he was still staring at me, not even looking at the road ahead. He had these scary, droopy eyes that made me very uncomfortable at this point. I used my scarf to cover half my face. This didn't stop him though. Instead, he suddenly started laughing like a maniac. Then he said some words in some language I don't understand. I asked him to repeat what he'd said, and my heart started beating very fast. "So many people are dying," he said, and started laughing again. I was too afraid to ask him what he meant. I sat there, frozen, regretting why I hadn't just waited at the station. My hands were shivering because I was trying to send a message to my friend. My fingers just wouldn't type properly. He turned around, now fully facing me, and asked if I was married. I managed to nervously say no, and then he said, "You will repent." With these words, he started to speed up. My mind was going crazy now. What the fuck could he mean by that? Why would he just randomly say such a thing to me? I tried looking around to see if it was a good idea to hop out of that taxi. It was still very dark though, and there weren't many cars around. There were maybe 2 or 3 cars that would pass by every 5 to 10 minutes, but by this point, I was convinced he was taking me to some other place. Maybe he wasn't, but I was too terrified to think straight. I was trembling with fear. I was sure he was going to attack me, or even do something worse. Suddenly, he slowed down greatly and started talking to himself. "People die, you'll die, she'll die." With those words, he stopped the taxi right in the middle of the road and told me to get out, saying we needed fresh air and the petrol was out. I could tell he wasn't drunk, but he appeared to be hallucinating. He kept blabbering and looking at the empty seat next to him, laughing for no reason. Arguing with him could make him annoyed, so I decided to do what he said until I got some help, or could stop him in some other way. I got out of the taxi, and so did he. Now he was right in front of me, about a car-length distance away, holding a lit torch, playing with it by his neck, and repeating over and over, "You will repent." I was almost crying with fear. Running was going to be impossible. I could easily be run over by a passing car due to the fog, and my mind was not working properly at this point. The thought of calling someone didn't occur to me earlier, and now it was too risky. This maniac was right there, holding that torch and moving around like he was possessed. It was like a scene from a horror movie. His eyes bulged out of his head in the torchlight that illuminated his serious face. He said something again, which I couldn't understand. I was extremely restless, looking around everywhere for help. To my relief, there was a car passing by. It stopped right there, looking at us standing in the middle of the road. The random passerby stopped and came running to me. He asked me to come back to his car, where his daughter, who was nearly my age, opened the door and let me inside. The insane cab driver just ran back to his taxi and sped off in seconds. I was still breathing heavily and told them what had happened in the last 30 to 40 minutes. They told me I was going in the opposite direction of my destination. It was not a safe area either, since many incidents had already occurred with girls in that area. I was right. That driver had been taking me to some other place. They explained that they'd noticed something was wrong by the way the man was just standing there holding that torch and the light shining on my silhouette. They decided to check what was going on. Had they not stopped, I doubt I'd be alive to tell of this incident. Since that night, I never travel alone at night again. I'm thankful to those people who saved my life. Sometimes we see many people who say they need help, but we fear it could be something sinister, so we just pass on by. Had they thought the same thing, I'd surely be dead. My sisters and I, of which I have 3, grew up in a smallish country town in rural Australia. As you could probably imagine, there was not a whole lot going on there. One by one, we jumped ship and moved on to greener pastures. In this instance, bigger, more exciting cities. This story is not mine. It's my younger sister's. When it came time for her to follow suit and move out, she followed the rest of us to Sydney. At the time this story takes place, she was 19 years old. At her first work Christmas party, not long after she arrived in town, she got slightly intoxicated. Not knowing the city very well, she opted to pay for a taxi in order to get home safely. She left the party, flagged one down, and jumped in the front seat next to the driver. She advised her destination and began making play conversation as she tells it. The driver was fine at first, but before too long he began turning the conversation to her looks and her job, telling her she was gorgeous and asking if she did any modeling. She laughed it off and told him no. It was at this point that while driving the taxi, he reached underneath his seat and pulled out a camera, snapping photos of her. His compliments grew increasingly cruder. She asked him to stop taking pictures of her, before getting angry and yelling at him to stop the taxi and let her out right now, which he refused to do. Thinking quickly, she looked to see if there were any red lights coming up ahead where he would have to stop the car. Luckily, there was one fast approaching. The driver slowed down gradually, rather than driving to the light and stopping, all the while continuing to take photos of her with one hand. When he was finally moving slow enough, she felt like she could exit the car without injuring herself. She opened the door and jumped out. He was moving slowly enough at that point that thankfully she was not injured. Intoxicated, scared, and lost, she sat in the gutter briefly to collect herself, before finally coming to the realization she had no idea where she was. She would have to get another taxi in order to get home. Reluctantly, she flagged down another car, this time getting in the back seat, and once again advising her destination. The driver of the second car saw she'd been crying, and was visibly shaken up. He asked her what had happened, and if she was alright. She explained the events. The driver paused for a moment, before gently informing her that the first driver had been taking her the complete opposite direction of where she had told him she needed to go. Attempts were made to find out who this guy was and report him. However, as my sister was drunk and new to the city, she was not able to provide enough specific information, i.e. location, exact time, taxi company, description of the driver, etc. Since this incident, whenever she has no other option to get a taxi home, the first thing she does after getting in the car is take a photo of the driver's license with her phone. It makes my skin crawl to think that the guy who did this is more than likely still driving taxis in the city, and that this is heralded as the safest way to get home if you're a young woman and it's late at night. So when I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7, in the mid-1990s, we took a family trip to the beach in Florida. We were staying in a beach house a short walking distance away from the beach. When we went down to the beach, I was supposed to stay in sight of my mom, but I'd wandered way down, and before I knew it, I was already lost. A lot of the houses looked the same, and I wasn't sure which one was ours. Plus, I couldn't see my mom anywhere. It started to rain soon after. I came upon a path that I was pretty sure would lead back to the house. only it didn't lead to a house at all, but instead a big parking lot. There was a single dirty van parked there. It was the only vehicle in sight. I was about to turn back when I noticed an overweight woman with brown hair, a hot pink tank top, and those big clunky thick glasses that were popular in the 80s, waving and smiling at me from the passenger seat of the van. She called out to me, "Oh my, it's raining so hard. Where's your mommy? Let us take you to her. It's dangerous to be out here in the rain. You could get struck by lightning or something." She was very friendly, almost overtly so. In the driver's seat was a very overweight man as well, without a shirt on. His hairy gray chest was wearing a clunky-looking gold chain. He was wearing yellow-tinted Elvis shades as well, and staring at me very intently. He was smoking a cigarette, which I knew was a bad thing to do. The woman stepped out of the van and kneeled down next to me. She asked me how old I was. When I told her honestly, she gleefully remarked, "Oh my, we have 2 boys your age at our house. You should come over and spend the night. We've got movies, Nintendo. In the morning, we've got all kinds of sugary cereal." I had been taught all about stranger danger, but at this point in my life, no adult had ever given me any reason not to trust them. The lady continued talking about stuff, like how the boys have go-karts and they drink chocolate milk or something like that. She tried to make it seem as enticing as possible for a 7-year-old kid. At this point, I was starting to trust her. Mostly, I liked the idea of getting to play with other kids my age. Then I remembered, though, that I needed to ask my mom first. I told her this, and she told me that was no problem. They lived just up the road, and my mom shouldn't mind that short a distance. It started raining even harder. She opened the sliding door of the van and said something like, "Now let's get you out of this rain and go find your mommy." I knew logically that I shouldn't do this, but the lady just seemed so nice. I was desperately wanting to get out of the rain as well. As I walked toward the open door of the van, though, I noticed an awful stench that almost made me gag. This set off alarm bells in my head that something was not quite right here. There were cigarette butts all over the floor. I looked up at the fat man, who was not only staring at me with this menacing glare, but also had a creepy, toothy smile. His teeth were stained a dark yellow. I could pick up on a very fucked up vibe coming from him, even at that young age. I instantly knew that I should run, but the woman was ushering me to hurry up and get inside. Her demeanor immediately changed. She began demanding, and even literally trying to push me and pick me up and shove me into the van. She started to sound angry. "Get the fuck in already," she said in a tone that was completely opposite of how she'd sounded before. I jumped to the side and started running as fast as I could. The woman managed to grab my wrist, but somehow I was able to slip free and run back to the beach. I think she tried to chase me, but like I'd said, she was very overweight, so she couldn't keep up for long. I made it back to my mom, who was obviously freaking out. I tried explaining what had happened to me, but I don't think at 7 years old that I was able to convey the gravity of what had happened to me, and I didn't even fully understand it myself. I work at a bar in a suburb of Melbourne that is safe during the day but has become sort of notorious for a high rate of rapes and abductions during the nighttime. Specifically along the main street that my work is on. I often work night shifts or late shifts even. Tonight I even finished at 11 p.m. for some context. I'm an uppity 19-year-old girl. I got out of work at 11 p.m. and started to walk down the street. It's quite well lit in some parts, but extremely dark in others. I began looking to hail a taxi. I was having no luck in finding one, though. In fact, there were very few cars about at this time, which was quite unusual, actually. I looked across the road, only to see a man with a hoodie on that was concealing almost all of his face. From the parts that I could see, he looked somewhat young. Maybe early to mid-20s, and seemed to be high on something. Quite a shady figure to me. I noted he was pretty tall as well. I guess I'd been looking at him for too long though, because he immediately crossed the street towards me, and I stopped looking at him. I started to walk faster, looking behind me to keep an eye on his distance, and now even more desperate to hop in a taxi. When I turned around to look at him once again, to my relief, he was walking down a side street. I stepped out onto the street to get a better view down the road when he came back around from that side street he'd just entered. My stomach dropped as I saw he now had 2 more people accompanying him. I started to walk really fast now, and they began to walk after me. I was going as fast as I could without jogging and was getting really panicked, thinking of hailing down just any car to ask someone for help. The 3 men were quickly gaining on me and were all screaming and shouting at me. My anxiety had started to sink in though, and I couldn't hear a word that they said. It was all only white noise basically. A taxi with its lights off drove past, and I ran out into the middle of the road. The driver stopped and said he was finished for the day and wasn't taking any more customers. I told him I was being followed and asked if I could sit in his car for a second just to feel safe. He let me into his taxi, drove 20 meters away, and told me to get out. The men were still there though. I begged him to take me out of sight at least a little further down the road. When he noticed how genuinely scared I was at that moment, I guess he got concerned and adopted a more fatherly tone. The taxi driver was actually extremely kind afterward and refused to let me get out of his car until he found me another taxi to get me home safely. He drove around with me for a few minutes until we found another empty one. He beeped the other cab down and explained the situation to him. I thanked both drivers profusely, and we swapped cars without incident. The next driver was also incredibly nice as well. He said he had a young daughter at home and got quite upset and angry, thinking about how people can take away your right to feel safe. I'm extremely thankful they were there to help me out that night. I don't know what would have happened if they weren't. This incident happened not all that long ago actually. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I obviously enjoy a night out with my friends. This particular night, a girlfriend and I had headed down to our local club/pub. We were dancing, drinking, and having a great time when I noticed it was around 2 a.m. or so. It was coming up on the closing time of 3 a.m. I noted we should probably think about heading out soon. If we waited until it actually closed, the wait for a taxi would be quite long, as everyone else would be looking for one as well. I let my friend in on my plans, and she insisted she wanted to stay. She then walked me out the front while I waited for a taxi. As we got to the top of the stairs, she saw me off at the door and headed back inside. I said goodbye to the bouncers, as I said it was a local place, and started walking over to the next taxi in the line. As I approached the taxi, I heard my friend call to me from behind. She still had my bank cards and money on her. Luckily, I walked back to the door to get them off of her, then said goodbye again. This time, as I turned to leave though, the bouncer stopped me. "Hey, you may want to take this second taxi in the line." Upon me questioning him, he didn't seem to have a reason behind this sudden advice and just insisted I trust him. I'm from Australia, and taxis usually wait in these lines. You have to take the next taxi as part of fairness. I explained to the bouncer that not only will taxi driver number 1 not be happy, but taxi number 2 may not even take my fare for this reason. Annoying, I know. Me being 19 and naive, I thought to myself, I only live around the corner. I have my phone as well. What's the worst that could happen, right? Well, obviously that was wrong. I took the first taxi in the line as I initially meant to. There were no immediate alarm bells. The man didn't seem any different than any other taxi driver. Not exactly polite, nor rude either. Just a normal guy. We were a few minutes into the fare, driving along the coastlines to my suburb, when all of a sudden, he pulled the taxi over to the side of the road and started walking around to my door. At this point, I was extremely confused as to what was going on. First, I thought maybe there was a flat tire or something, until he opened my door. I asked him what he was doing, and he replied to me, "We're going to the beach now." Alarm bells and red flags went off left, right, and center. I grabbed my phone and dialed 000 right away. I told him I was calling the police. I immediately saw him start to panic. He yelled at me not to be so silly and said he just wanted to spend some quality time with me. He reached for my arm and grabbed me to try to pull me out of the car. I pushed him away though, grabbed the door and slammed it closed. I waited to be connected. I've read quite a lot about people who are polite to creepers in these situations, but I was anything but at this point. I was soon connected with someone from emergency who asked me what my emergency was. I said I needed assistance right now and gave her the area where we were. She then proceeded to tell me I needed to call the police assistance line if it wasn't a true emergency. "Well, it's about to be if you don't get someone down here right now." She assured me a car was on the way and to get out of the car by myself. We were only a minute or two down the road from where we'd departed. Usually, there were at least 3 or 4 squad cars situated there, preparing for the end-of-night antics. Because of this, I knew I could have assistance in no time. While this was happening, the man was walking back to his driver's side, attempting to get back in. I don't know what he would have done if he'd gotten in with me in the car still, kicked me out or what, but I jumped out of the car as he got in, and he sped off without looking back. I kicked myself for not getting his taxi ID, which is something I'd usually do. I kicked myself even more for not just listening to the bouncer, who I see now obviously had a good reason for me to not get in this car. I rang my friend and asked her to stay on the phone with me. I told her I was still outside waiting for the taxi and had gotten bored. She offered to come and wait, but I insisted I was fine. Once the police came, they took me home and asked me what happened. They took a statement from me as well, but there wasn't much they could do, as I hadn't gotten any information on the taxi. The most I could provide was the driver's appearance and the company he worked for. I didn't tell anyone about the situation except for my then friend, who's now my boyfriend. He was shaken up by this. I hate thinking about what might have happened that night, and how lucky I am that it didn't. About 2 months on, my boyfriend, his housemate, and my sister arranged a cab to pick us up at my boyfriend's place and take us to the same venue this initially happened at. Guess which driver showed up? Yeah, that very same guy. I didn't say anything at the time to anyone because I knew it wouldn't have turned out well in the moment, but this time I made sure to get his ID and plate number and reported it to the police the very next day. Apparently, this wasn't even the first time he'd done something like this. It was the furthest he'd ever gotten, though. Most of the other complaints were similar. From what I know, the police made contact with the taxi company and informed them of the situation. I think he might have been let go after, but I'm not sure. I've definitely learned a lesson from this, though. I'm a 17-year-old from the UK, and this took place a few months ago at my grandfather's funeral, or at least the after-party for it. Me, my cousin, and her best friend were all drinking a bit, because that's what you do at a wake or whatever. I was 16 at the time it happened, and I needed to get home at 1 in the morning. I was completely shit-faced, so I called a taxi for myself. I wasn't going to be able to walk home in the state I was in. After 10 minutes, the taxi arrived. I quickly finished my drink, said goodbye to everyone there, and got in the taxi waiting outside. The taxi driver was a pretty ordinary-looking Pakistani or Indian-seeming guy, with dark hair and some thick glasses. I paid to go home, which cost something along the lines of £40, 50 maybe. I never said a word to him beside my destination. On the way, he asked a bunch of questions. My age, why I was out drinking so late, and why I was going home alone. I told him I was 18. I don't know why I did. Maybe I just wanted to feel older or not get in trouble or something. I said I was on the way back from a funeral and wanted to dull the pain. I didn't answer the last question he asked me though, if anyone was at home to open the door for me or see me to bed safely. At the time, I was just thinking the man was a good Samaritan, wanting to make sure I was safe. I just said that everyone at home was likely asleep, but it didn't really matter. I was often a rebel and came in late anyway, and they all knew that. In retrospect, I probably should have just said there was someone at home waiting for me to return. About halfway through the journey, the driver drove right past the turn he was meant to take. I pointed this out to him, and he just said his way was much quicker, and he didn't want to waste my time getting home. Wrong turn after wrong turn passed, and he used the same excuse every time. This way is much quicker, come on, don't worry about it. Then though, he turned down an alley near a closed down theater and a car dealership, which was also closed down. I told him he must be confused, because this was nowhere near my house. The car slowly came to a stop, and I became even more confused. I asked him what was wrong. He wrapped his arm around me and told me he couldn't focus on the road because of how distracting I was. He leaned into a kiss, but I blocked him with my hand and asked him what the hell he was doing. Keeping one hand on my shoulder, he grabbed my leg. This is when I started getting serious creeper vibes. He then unzipped his trousers and presented himself to me. I went from thinking he was just a regular guy who'd been receiving mixed signals or something to a full-blown rapist in seconds. He began to try and feel me up. I honestly had no idea what to do in this situation. Should I do what he wanted or try to escape? What if I didn't? He might try to kill me or something. I made a snap judgment and went along with it. I pretended everything was totally fine. I started to feel him up too. Luckily, before it could get anywhere else, he got a call. He told me he needed to answer it, and we had to do this some other time. I said okay, and he dropped me off at home. I haven't told anyone, and don't plan on doing so. I haven't called a single taxi since. I'm glad it didn't go anywhere further though, because if it did, I could have been killed or worse. Whoever was on the other side of that phone call, I really owed them my life. I called the police anonymously the next morning and gave them a description of the incident. No arrest has been made yet though. My husband and I were stopping over in New York before heading to our temporary home of Poland. We had been living there for about a year or so and are originally from Australia. We'd spent the past year traveling throughout some of the more shady parts of Europe, so we thought we were generally prepared for any weird incidents that might occur. We were tired as we walked through JFK, ignoring everyone who wanted us to take their special taxi or whatever. We went outside and waited in the line with all the other irritated travelers. When it was our turn, the taxi driver got out and left. Another guy came and took our bags. The motor was still running even. I didn't really think anything of it, and didn't really care at that point. When I insisted I take my own bag, and tried to open the trunk though, the man suddenly snapped at me. I was startled and said it was okay. I'd just sit with it on my lap instead. My husband and I traveled light, so we only had one suitcase between us. "Can you open the trunk?" my husband asked the guy. "Otherwise, there's going to be no room for us." The guy already looked pissed, and all we were asking was for him to do his job. I was already looking around for another cab, because I couldn't be bothered. "Fine," the guy snapped. He basically ripped the trunk open. I hadn't even gotten into the car yet. It was kind of a paranoid thing that I never got into the taxi alone, as a result of some kidnapping stories in Greece of a similar nature. I waited, and then I saw what was in the trunk as the man quickly tried to close it once more. It wasn't all over the flooring or anything, just on one side, but it instantly made me feel ill. I could see what looked a lot like blood. The spot was visibly wet, and I stared at it blankly. Even with the dim light, I could just about make out various other stains of similar darker colors. I had barely begun to process what I'd seen before he slipped my suitcase in and the trunk door was slammed. I was now wide awake and did not want to get in this taxi. Everything was wrong, and this was clearly a mistake. "Come on, what's the holdup? Get in!" the taxi stand dude urged us, as equally pissed off passengers behind us were waiting for their own rides. I tried to get my husband's attention, but he was already in the back seat. If this were a horror movie and I was watching, I would be screaming at the screen, "Don't get in that cab!" I got in the taxi anyway, with my bag on my lap. I clutched it as we spun around the corners, went forward sharply, and had brakes slamming constantly. I felt sick and couldn't stop thinking about what I'd just seen. Was that real? Halfway through my haze, though, I realized we were not going the right way. I mean, far be it for me to tell taxi drivers in their own city where the hell they're going. I like to be prepared, though, and I like to know where I am. If we're not taking the tourist scenic route where they charge you a lot of dough, this guy was clearly going the wrong way. "Hey, where are you going?" The words just fell out of my mouth. The man didn't say anything, though. He didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't even respond. "What?" My husband asked me if we were really going the wrong way. I shouted that we were. My husband, not one to take shit from anyone, then turned to the man. "Hey man, don't think you can screw with us. We're not paying more than we agreed upon, so stop fucking around and take us where we're going, or I'm gonna call the cops." He had no idea why I was freaking out, though. I didn't care about the extra money. I thought we were just a pawn in whatever this guy's master plan was. We were going to be swimming with the fishes in the Hudson or something. I was going crazy. My mind was wandering. Maybe that actually was blood in the trunk. This guy was going to kill us with his driving either way. Maybe some plans for later in some warehouse with all his serial killer friends or something. The driver immediately slammed on the brakes at a set of lights. "I'm pretty sure this is not a real taxi," I muttered to myself. The cab driver immediately spoke up. "Do you see the sign up there? It's a fucking taxi, you moron," he snapped. "Well then do your job," my husband snapped back at him without a second thought. Perhaps the guy thought this was too much trouble when loudmouth Ozzy Bogan and his crazy wife started snapping at him, because the driver suddenly turned around and we were going the right way to get to the hotel now. I made sure to check the trunk again when we got out, but it was much darker now, and I couldn't see anything clearly, except for a lot of shredded rags for some reason, with a deep rust color staining them all. So I recently had the unfortunate ability to recall something really scary my older sister and I saw on a walk home during elementary school. She confirmed what I remembered was true, and the more I think about it, the more it scares my now 36-year-old brain. My sister Bianca and I are 4 years apart. I had the blessing of being able to have the most attentive and protective big sister ever, and she always had this remarkable sixth sense about her. So I was 7 years old, first or second grade. My sister was in the 5th grade, age 11. We lived in a small town in the South Bay area of California, about 45 minutes south of San Jose. It was an extremely hot day, but we walked the usual 8 blocks from our elementary school to our home. Some info regarding our mother. She worked nights stalking at our local Safeway most of my adolescent life, so we were very independent children. Get up, get ready for school, go on our own. Mom slept until 3:30 p.m., then cleaned up, washed, and made dinner. Then she went out to work right away. That's just some background for the type of childhood I had at the time. Every day we stayed after school for an hour with our favorite kindergarten teacher, Miss Marfia. My siblings and I all had the blessing of having the same teacher that we developed a super close relationship with. We enjoyed helping her clean up and prepare for her morning class every day. Usually afterwards, Miss Marfia would drive us home, but she couldn't that afternoon. She had to stay later than usual to wait for her husband James to pick her up and take her to the mechanic to grab her car. This meant that my sister and I were going to be the only kids walking home at this time. We didn't care though, because we loved helping out our wonderful teacher, who was also our friend. In the 90s, the area behind our house was undeveloped. A lot a good 3 blocks long by 1.5 blocks wide, directly in front of the newly placed skate park. From our backyard gate, we could see that very same park. Upon passing by that park, we would always race and run from the sidewalk that bordered it to the back door of our fence. This was my favorite, because my sister always let me feel like I was a winner. Halfway through the run this time, though, I was ahead, as usual, and I was passing through the normal sticker brushes. There was a lot of dirt and ugly tall weeds that would poke you badly if you got too close. Some of the bushes you could even hide under, they were so big. I'm literally only 100 yards from the fence when I hear my sister suddenly scream out my name. Not like a normal scream either. She shouted my first and middle name extremely sharply. I stopped dead in my tracks. I turned around and yelled backward, "What?" Before I could even fully turn around to see what was going on, though, she pummeled into me. She was grabbing my shoulders while wrapping her arm to shield my face from what I'm sure I would be scared of in that moment. This was all while pushing me forward. I was so confused. There was no time to say anything. From the break between her fingers, though, I swore I could see 2 sets of legs under a large bush. This is where my memory plays like I'm just watching a movie, and I can rewind every detail. I've spent many hours with my sister, recalling everything I'd blocked out. I was scared, but I could vividly recall it still. I witnessed an assault. They were lying down under a larger bush, with both sets of legs exposed. I saw a man dressed in a red tank top, with blue dirty jeans and black boots. He had sunglasses on, and he was very agitated looking. This was because he was choking a young woman. She was probably barely 20, wearing overalls, a white shirt, and white sandals. Her face was dirty, bruised, and her lips were blue, scratching at his hands and screaming. This is all I got to see, obviously more than enough for a child. My sister quickly grabbed me and yanked me an alternative way. I was so scared, asking her, "What was that? That guy was killing her." My sister simply said we had to hurry home and tell my mom. All I could see after is a blur until we got home and woke my mom up, hysterically telling her what we saw. She called the police, but we never got any information regarding the woman. I've scoured the internet for anything about an assault, kidnapping, anything in the area, but I've never seen or heard anything. My sister cried when I asked her recently about this memory, thinking it was something I'd just had a nightmare about once. The details I recalled, though, made her scared that it severely traumatized me enough to not remember. Who knows, though? It's scary in any context. I really hope that girl managed to get away, though, and the man that was attacking her reaped what he sowed eventually. This story happened during a more difficult time in my life. There was a period of time in my late 20s or so that I was homeless for quite a while. It wasn't in an urban area, though. It was outside of a small town in Tennessee. I had gotten into drinking a little bit too much, and was also doing some drugs a little too much as well. Although I was able to get little bits of money here and there from doing odd jobs or begging, I would normally spend it getting wasted instead of trying to find a place to live. I had been kicked out of some motels in the area, which were mostly where people liked to hang around. There was a wooded area right outside of town, along one of the roads that was an area I usually stayed in. I lived for years there in a tent, and although some other people would come and go with their own equipment, I would occasionally meet someone who would stay with me for a while. There was a bus stop in town, where I guess sometimes people from out of town would get stuck in our area, with nowhere to go. More than once, I'd invited those people to come and stay with me in my tent. This is what happened on one of the times that I happened to do that. I'd been hanging out in town at the convenience store that the bus stop was nearby. The cashiers would sometimes give homeless people free fountain drinks and didn't seem to mind if we waited outside with a sign asking for spare change. That afternoon, there was a teenager boy who had just gotten off the bus. He was having an argument with the bus driver as he got off. It seemed he was begging the driver to let him ride just a little bit further on the bus. However, it seemed the driver was not going to allow this. Apparently, the kid had only paid enough to get as far as our town. The kid, visibly upset, got off the bus and had pulled away, stranding the kid in our little one-horse town. After walking around for a while, obviously not knowing where to go, he sat on the side of the parking lot, holding his head in his hands. After watching this unfold, I walked up to the kid. I found out I was right about everything I'd assumed. He didn't know anyone in the entire state, much less the town. He had no money and no way to get anywhere or do anything. It seemed he had run away from home for some reasons that I would later find out were abusive parents. This was going to be his first night without a roof over his head. I offered to show him back to the area where my tent was and told him he could stay there if he wanted to. I was able to calm the kid down quite a bit, and even told him there were ways in town he could find work and get some money if he really wanted to move on to wherever he was headed to. He had a lot to talk about, and since I spent a lot of time by myself, I was more than happy to listen to what he had to say. We stayed up pretty late just chatting about stuff. Around the time I thought we should finally get some sleep, I noticed a light shining for a brief moment in the woods. I didn't know what that was, but I saw it 2 more times as well. There weren't any other people staying out there at the time, so I didn't really know what that could be. I knew the police wouldn't be coming out here anytime soon, but the light made me think there was definitely someone out there in the woods. I didn't want to worry the kid, so I didn't say anything about it at first. I mean, he'd already gone through enough that day. I kept an eye on the woods though, just in case someone really was out there. I couldn't for the life of me think of anyone who had any reason to be though. I just kept an eye on it and decided that if they got too close, I would take care of whatever was happening discreetly. I didn't even get the chance to do that though. I heard a few noises, like someone walking around in the woods, but I couldn't see any more light. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, this huge guy just came charging out of the woods from behind the kid and at him. I reacted as quickly as I could, pushing the kid out of the way. I suddenly felt a sharp stab in the shoulder. It wasn't the first time I'd ever been stabbed in my life, but it hurt just as bad as it did ever before. I told the kid to run towards town where I'd met him, and he took off running pretty quickly. The guy left me there and started to run after the kid. I got up in pain and figured I'd better follow behind. I wasn't the best runner with all my years of substance abuse, so I wasn't able to catch up with them. I also knew, though, that I couldn't let that kid fend for himself. He was already scared from running away, and being left in our town alone, being chased by a maniac was just that much worse. They were both running so fast, though, that I just couldn't catch up. I wondered why the guy had taken off after the kid and not attacked me further. It didn't take long for me to get winded, but I kept following the path that would take us back to the road, then back to the convenience store. It was a 24/7 store, so hopefully he would get there and get away from that guy chasing him. I emerged from the woods and onto the back road that I walked along to get to the store. There were some houses along that road, but it was quite late and all their lights were already off. I rushed toward the store, my sides bursting with pain because of how bad a shape I was in. I didn't see anyone alongside the road. I made my way down in the dark and came upon the convenience store. There were many trees and bushes on both sides of the road, so my eyes kept darting back and forth to see if anyone was hiding in them. I don't know what I would have done though if that man truly had hidden there waiting to pounce again. I staggered toward the store, definitely expecting something to happen. I got there though without further incident. I didn't see anything at first. My mind went to the worst, told me the man must have caught the kid and dragged him off into the woods. I was worried and about to turn around and go back to look for him. Then I noticed him inside the store though, talking to one of the workers. I went in there and tried to find out what happened. The man had chased the kid out of the woods, but then ran back into them, he told us. So the kid just continued to the store. The man didn't seem to want to follow him out of the woods. The kid got to the store and they called the police right away. When the police came, we gave them a description of the man. The cops seemed to immediately know who it was just from the description. When the guy was arrested, we were able to identify him quickly. He had previously served time in jail for for assaulting other homeless people in town years back. I guess he really hated homeless people, thinking that they were ruining his town, and seeing a new one arrive just made him really pissed off. I have a friend of mine who went through this experience with me. Only the fact that we both still swear that we went through it makes sense to us. And that will make a lot more sense to you when the story is over. My friend Eddie and I grew up together going hiking. We hiked around all the time as kids, and continued doing so as adults too. As adults though, there was this very specific area that we loved going out into and exploring in. It was big and vast enough that we were always able to find something new every time we went out. This happened on a fall day. We were both wearing jackets and hats because it was pretty cool outside. We had been out for a couple of days, but it wasn't supposed to be a really long hiking trip, just a couple of days worth. We were already heading back to civilization after this. After lunchtime, the two of us hiked a bit away from each other. I was sure I knew where Eddie was though at all times. I could distinctively hear him in the woods most of the time. I knew what a person moving around sounded like. It was mildly shocking then when he was able to sneak up on me from behind. It really almost startled me out of my skin, but that surprise ended quickly. He seemed really excited about something. He said he had found something he told me I would never believe unless I saw it myself. I followed Eddie around to the side of this one hill, and what he brought me to was very shocking indeed. There was some sort of structure built into the side. It had a small entryway, but it was like a man-built entryway right into the side of the hill. I had come across structures in the woods before, but this was completely different. "Come on, let's go in and check it out," Eddie suggested. "I wanted to wait to get you here too. I wanted to protest. I had no idea what this could be. I knew some people way out in the hills could be really weird. Who knew if this wasn't the dwelling of some man-hating hermit who would try to gut us? But Eddie was really insistent. There were some branches in the way of the door. We moved them, and as we opened the door, we went inside. It appeared to be some sort of bunker or something, built right into the hill. It almost looked like something someone would have built to survive a nuclear apocalypse. That's about the only way I could ever think to describe it. Honestly, that in and of itself wouldn't have been too much of a surprise. It definitely wasn't surprising those sorts of things existed, especially knowing the kinds of people who avoid civilization. What was unnerving, though, was the stuff we found once inside. There were weapons that were definitely not old. There were all manners of rifles and guns and such things that I didn't really know what they were even. What was scarier, though, was that there was a table with some writings on it. Eddie started sorting through the stuff, saying it was some sort of doomsday end-of-the-world type ramblings. There was a lot of anti-government stuff in there, too. Now, I wasn't really worried too much about whoever kept this place overthrowing the government, but I was very worried about such a person catching us intruding upon their bunker. There was every indication that this was definitely not an abandoned place. I was very thankful when I was able to finally convince Eddie to leave. I was pretty worried on our way back, too. Eddie wasn't freaked out at all, though. He really thought the entire thing was pretty cool. I remembered earlier, though, thinking that I'd heard Eddie walking around in the woods. Well, what if it had been someone else entirely? As we were hiking back, I kept on hearing these things. I heard someone walking in the woods, like we were being followed. Eddie just kept telling me I was being paranoid and hearing things. We camped out that night. It would be the last night we did before we got back to civilization. I was still really disturbed by what we'd seen in that bunker. I was also certain someone was out there in the woods. Every little noise made me nervous. It was hard getting to sleep, but eventually I did. The following morning, Eddie woke me up and told me to come out of my tent right now. I did so, and was pretty terrified about what I saw. There were 2 dolls hanging from a branch of a tree. They were hanging by ropes around their necks. They were both male dolls as well, and they hadn't been there when we'd gone to sleep. We took it as the warning it probably was. Eddie finally believed, as I had, that it was a mistake to go into that bunker. The best thing to do would be to get out of the woods as quickly as we could. It was a harrowing journey. I swore we were being followed the entire time. I was worried about every little noise I heard. I couldn't keep myself from being on edge the whole time. Well, obviously, Eddie and I made it out of the woods just fine in the end. I mean, if we didn't, I wouldn't even be able to tell you this story. But that was definitely the scariest encounter I ever had. Whoever built that bunker, he knew that we had been in it, and he certainly wasn't happy about that. I think we're very lucky he only threatened us with some dolls. It definitely could have been much, much worse. I used to go hiking out in the woods whenever my family went to visit my grandparents' house. I wasn't one much for sitting around and listening to old people talking, so I would excuse myself and go out to explore. I won't say exactly where this story took place. This is because I've noticed that sometimes people in these narrated story videos like to argue that some stories couldn't have taken place where the writer claimed they did. I don't want to go through that kind of bullshit. I can guarantee, however, that this story did happen. It happened in the fall. I was on a hike and it was moderately chilly outside. Not exactly cold, just a bit brisk. That was the best time to go on hikes though, in my opinion. Many occasions I would just follow the creeks as a method of not getting lost. This time, however, I wanted to explore some new areas. I didn't follow the creeks like usual. This is significant because although I hadn't seen water in several hours, I began to hear flowing water up over the hill. I figured it must have been a huge body of water, as I could hear it very well from such a large distance away. Going over the hill into the next hollow, there was indeed a very large creek. I was astonished to see it led to the most beautiful country waterfall I'd ever seen. I was eager to go down the side of the hill and get a closer look at this marvel. I climbed down the side and approached the waterfall. It was extremely beautiful, and I was even able to walk right up to it. As I was admiring both the waterfall and the beautiful pool into which it was running, I actually noticed that there was an opening behind it. It really wasn't too difficult to slip behind. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to risk getting a bit wet. I slipped behind it to see if anything was actually in there. Well, there was. When I saw what was behind the waterfall, though, my blood ran cold in my veins. The opening was actually a rather large cave. There were a lot of items in the cave, and not the sort of things I would have expected to see lying around in them either. I'm not the most informed person on drugs, but there was obviously a very sophisticated cooking lab in the cave. There were weapons and various crates as well. Obviously, what was going on behind this waterfall was something very illegal. I guess that makes sense, because who would go looking for something like that in a cave hidden behind a waterfall? Well, unfortunately for me, it was the exact sort of thing a teenage boy would definitely do. I did not need to get caught stumbling upon this. After catching my breath for a moment, I decided to get out of there as quickly as possible. I ran out and climbed back up the hill, then out of the hollow that the waterfall was in. When I got to the top, curiosity got the better of me, and I just had to look back at that waterfall. It was just in time to see one of the scariest looking men I'd ever seen in my life quickly approaching that cave. I was lucky they hadn't noticed me. Once they were behind the waterfall, I made my way home as fast as I could. I told my grandma and my parents what I had come across. I expected them to call the police or something. Instead, they just told me there were a lot of illegal things that happened out in the hills. They also said that the police likely would not even get involved. They told me there were some really dangerous people out there, and the best way of dealing with them was to be nowhere near them. I guess that's some good reasoning, but I always wonder what would have happened if I had found that waterfall 15 minutes later than I did, and those men had come back into the cave while I was still looking around. I'm a hiker. I'd like to think I'm a somewhat experienced hiker, but one thing I definitely do not have much experience doing is exploring caves. I paid the price for that one time when I was out hiking by myself. I tend to go on these multiple day-long hikes. Most of the time, I'm out for about a week or so. On this instance, I'd already been out for about 3 days. I was pretty deep in the woods. It was at least a couple of days of hiking from getting back. While I was out hiking, I happened to stumble across a cave. I had to consider whether or not I really wanted to actually try and explore it. I was very curious, but I was also a bit scared too. I'd heard way too many stories about people getting caught in caves by themselves. I could fall in a hole or get attacked by a bat even. Who knew what would happen if I went in there? Still, I felt I had to check on it and see what was in that cave. The cave itself was almost like a big tunnel or even a mine shaft. I remember wondering to myself if it might actually have been at one time. Then I wouldn't know why anyone would build a mine so far away from civilization though. The further I walked into the cave, the creepier it got. It got darker and darker. I hadn't considered using my flashlight, however, plus it was in my backpack. It was in the middle of the day that I came across this cave, and when I entered, I truly had no idea how deep it was going to go. I was going so far into it that when it got too dark to really make out much of anything, I decided to take out my backpack and fish out my flashlight. It was after I had taken off one of the arm straps that I plainly heard someone call out from in front of me. "Hey, what the hell are you doing in here?" Although the voice came from in front of me, my head was turned slightly around tending to my backpack. I jumped up a bit, and something or someone then shoved me to the ground. I hadn't gotten my light yet. All I could see was the shadowy shape of a human form in the cave with me. I was terrified, wondering who or what the hell could have been in there with me. I tried to get up and run, but as I did so, someone grabbed my foot. My attempt to get up caused me to stumble and fall onto my hands and knees. I kept trying to get up, but someone was very obviously struggling with me to keep me down. It was scary, and I thought I might actually die in that cave. Fortunately, I recalled I did have a hunting knife on my belt. I fumbled with it for a moment, which was quite difficult because I was trying to fight off a man who was attacking me in the dark. I couldn't see either him or my belt. Finally, though, I managed it. Once I got to the sheath, I pulled it out and slashed out several times in the direction the man was attacking from. In the end, I heard several screams of pain, and whoever it was stopped struggling with me. Getting up, I ran like hell out of that cave, and I kept running. I didn't look back once. I kept on thinking that if I did, I would see some scary as hell person rushing after me in the dark. I just kept running, and I ended up running further than I ever would have thought was even possible. When you're scared out of your mind, though, you might be surprised what you're capable of. I didn't even set up camp when it got dark. I wanted to put as much distance between me and whoever that was as possible. When about 8 hours had passed since the incident, I finally figured I was safe enough to camp out. It almost didn't matter though. I couldn't exactly sleep much that night. And when I did, it was a light and broken sleep. I kept expecting someone to suddenly burst into my tent and try and kill me. It took a couple of days to get out of those woods, and it was hell the entire time. Fortunately, I did not come across the man again though. I, a 52-year-old woman at the time this happened, was traveling by car to an out-of-town job assignment. I had stopped at a popular and busy gas station/travel stop to fill up the car, stretch my legs, use the bathroom, and grab a snack. While I was in the middle of doing this, I was approached by a developmentally disabled woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s. She said she was looking for a ride to a town a couple of towns over. Her previous ride had seemingly abandoned her while she went off to use the restroom. Needless to say, she was more than a little bit upset. She didn't have a cell phone and didn't know any phone numbers either, so I couldn't call someone to come help her. I checked with the employees at the store, and they said she'd been out there for an hour looking for a ride. She told them her friends had left her while she was in the restroom as well. I made the decision to do something I've never done before in that moment: offer a stranger a ride. I wasn't going to the town she wanted to go to, but I was headed in that direction. I told her I could at least drop her off at the grocery store in the next town over, where I would be turning off to go to my destination. That particular store was always busy, and it was very likely she'd have an easier time getting a ride to where she wanted there. She'd also end up 5 miles away from where she wanted to go instead of 25 miles now, and she'd have an easier time walking that distance if the worst came to pass. She found this agreeable, and we set off together. Right away, as soon as we left though, I noticed a van started following us. I tried my best to lose this van, but it kept pace with us perfectly. Meanwhile, the woman kept saying she wanted to play with my phone now. I told her no, it wasn't a toy. It was my work phone, so I moved it out of her reach. The van sped up and started to get closer. Suddenly, the woman told me she remembered her boyfriend's phone number, and we needed to call him right now. Obviously, I couldn't use my phone while I was driving. This was pre-car sync voice-activated operation. I was approaching the outskirts of the business district of the next town. No cell phone use while driving signs were everywhere. I tried to tell her, "We're almost there anyway, you can just call him from the parking lot when we get there." She became very agitated though, and kept on screaming, "No, you have to take me home." "Well, I told you I can't do that, I'm not going there. It's in the opposite direction of where I need to go, and I'm expected soon. We can just call him from the lot." She became more and more upset and frustrated, and the van was getting closer and closer. I pulled into the store parking lot. It was about 4 p.m., and the grocery store was quite busy as usual. I pulled up in front and asked for her boyfriend's phone number. Well, wouldn't you know it, suddenly she couldn't remember his number anymore. She refused to get out of the car and started arguing with me. The van pulled up in the parking lot next to us. There was a sheriff's deputy parked nearby, thankfully. I rolled down my window and signaled that I needed to speak with him right away. He walked over and asked me what was going on. I told him the story about the woman and how she wouldn't get out of my car now, under my breath so she couldn't hear. I also told him a suspicious van had been following us. The deputy spoke to the woman. "Come on, miss. She brought you where you asked her to. It's time for you to leave the car now." She slowly got out of the car, and I asked once more for her boyfriend's number. She looked at me like I was crazy. "What do you mean? I don't have a boyfriend. Oh, look, there are my friends now." She pointed to that damn van that had been following us. The deputy and I shared a look. He leaned in to whisper to me, "Give me your contact info. I can delay them for about 20 minutes while I check their license and registration and lecture them about abandoning a special needs adult. Why don't you get out of here and I'll check up on you when my shift is over. And don't pick up any more hitchhikers in the future." I left soon after and went to my destination. The deputy called me to make sure I got where I was going safely and told me they were keeping an eye on the van and its owner. He also told me he contacted a colleague at the sheriff's department in the county where I was working and that she would contact me in a day or two as well. While I was on assignment there, I spoke to 2 deputies and a detective about the woman in the suspicious van. No one ever told me anything about them, but it was clear they were very interested in them for whatever reason. My nightmare is that one day I'll turn on a true crime show or something and see a report about this woman and her gang robbing or killing someone. This story starts back in 2017, when my boyfriend and I just started living together. Rent in our country has been really high for years now, so after looking for a long while, we decided to emigrate. Our college is very close to the border between our country and the neighboring country, and in the neighboring country, the rents are way lower. After a few months of searching, we found an apartment there. It used to be the old hay attic of a farm, I guess, but a rich couple, the landlords, had turned the attic into an apartment years ago and turned the rest of the house into a home for themselves. We actually quite liked the place and readily signed the rental agreement. We moved in September of 2017. At first, all was great. We really liked our landlord and his wife, even though they were fairly eccentric. After a while, things became less comfortable though. The landlord would blast loud music at all hours of the night. If he asked him to fix something, he would show up at 2 a.m. He constantly bragged about how he kicked out the previous tenants after they'd told him the rent was too high. When rats infested our roof, ceiling, and created holes that went straight outside, he'd use expanding foam to kill them, trapping the rats in the process, which led to them dying and decomposing in the ceiling. You can just imagine the smell. Most importantly, he would knock on our door for minutes on end, and if we didn't answer, he would just stand underneath our window staring before yelling our names over and over. It was like he knew we were there but just ignoring him somehow. Once he even managed to get into the apartment without permission. I got home sweaty as hell, so I walked into the bathroom. When I came out wrapped in a towel and walked toward the living room, he suddenly burst in through the front door. I asked him what he was doing, and he told me he'd left his key in our house after a visit, even though he'd used that very same key to get in just now. The last points finally clicked when we moved out though. The landlord was about to move away to Poland, and the new landlord was an asshole, so we decided to just move out. We told the previous one about this, and he said, "Well, can you give me back my camera at least?" We thought he was joking at first, but after he left, we suddenly got a weird feeling about this, so we decided to check. The apartment had a very high pointed ceiling, so we had to use a large ladder to climb up there. What we found though, on the high horizontal beam, was a small camera pointed down to our living room. I think I still have the video somewhere of my boyfriend cutting the wire. All of a sudden, the cam network we'd see on the Wi-Fi list all the time on our phones was gone as well. We moved out and thought about pressing charges, but this man had a great lawyer and was long gone by then. I really do need to say I hope we don't meet again, as recently one of our new neighbors told us a man called the landlord's name was on our street looking for us for some reason. I was just chatting to a friend when I remembered this creepy story from the pandemic. I, 30 and female, lived alone. I had no car and there were no shops nearby either. It was about 9 p.m. and I'd just gotten back from work when I realized there was no food in the house. I ordered a grocery delivery on Uber Eats. I asked them to leave it at the door due to COVID rules. There was a knock at the door later, and I saw a tall, skinny man standing right by it. I shouted through the letterbox to leave it on the floor and back off. He said no and that he had to hand it to me, as it had alcohol inside the order. I hadn't ordered any alcohol myself, so I told him he must have the wrong delivery. He simply claimed it was correct. I told him to put it on the floor and back up again. He refused once more. Stupidly, I opened the door a crack to tell him to do it due to COVID rules and that this was getting quite annoying. He stepped towards the door in that moment and grabbed the handle fiercely. I pulled the door shut before he could do anything and shouted at him to leave or I was reporting him. He put the order down and stepped back. I asked him through the letterbox to back up further. He did, but again, when I opened the door, he tried to rush at me once more. I always remember I felt a chill down my spine in that moment when I heard him muttering, "Pretty, very pretty," in a low monotone voice. I also noticed he had his phone out pointed at me and asked him what he was doing through the door. He said he had to take a picture, but it was pointed at my face, not the bag on the floor. I quickly opened the door, snatched it up, and slammed it behind me, then locked up tight. I watched through a crack in the curtains as he just stood there by my door, pacing back and forth as if he couldn't make up his mind on something. He knocked over and over, but I tried my best to ignore him. I was getting seriously creepy vibes now and called my best mate for some advice. She told me to report him and not to open the door again no matter what. I shouted for him to leave, but he continued to stand there in front of my door. My dog, who's normally the sweetest thing, had picked up on my anxiety and began barking at the man as well. He turned around and got into his car that was parked across the street from my house. He made it look like he was going to leave, but I kept watching for the next 20 or so minutes through my window, and he just sat there. He continued staring at my house. I figured at first maybe he was picking another order to take or something, but then suddenly a message popped up on Uber. He told me he'd forgotten a bag in his car and asked me to come out and get it from him. I checked my order and everything was right there. I messaged him, saying that couldn't possibly be correct. He got very agitated and insistent, saying he couldn't leave until I came out to him and picked it up. He was practically begging me to come out to his car, saying it wouldn't take more than a minute and I could simply grab it from in his passenger side. I lost my shit. I told him I'd heard what he said earlier, and I knew he was taking a picture of me, not the order. I was going to call the police right now. He still insisted I had to come outside. The entire time I was on the phone with the police, he was still messaging me, even saying, "The police won't come. Come on, pick up the order and I'll leave. Why are you making it so hard on us?" The police told me someone would be there within 20 minutes and to stay inside with all doors and windows locked. My dog was going nuts now. My neighbor's husband, who was 6'4" and built like a brick shed, texted me saying he'd heard a commotion outside and asking if I was okay. I told him about what was going on. He immediately ran outside, screaming at the driver to fuck off before he got fucked up. The delivery guy peeled out of there. My neighbors rushed over to make me a brew and wait for the police. I made a report to both them and Uber, but all I got was an apology from Uber. The police never got back to me. I got a car shortly thereafter and never had to use Uber again, at least until my boyfriend moved in. When I was around 19 or so, I worked nights at this shitty hotel chain in my hometown. It was generally pretty chill though. You'd get your occasional weirdos and creeps, but I could pretty much handle my own, and I got used to this pretty quickly. However, one guy was way worse than anything I'd ever encountered up until that point. It was an average night, spent checking guests in, doing laundry, stalking, etc. There were 2 sets of doors at the entrance, the inner ones being locked after the night shift started. It was around 3 a.m. or so when this guy just randomly shows up and rings me through the lobby phone set between the 2 doors. Immediately, before I could even get my customer service on, he started frantically demanding I call medical transport. I didn't really know what he was talking about, but I tried my best to help him, asking him questions to further identify the situation. Eventually, I was just going to let him in so I could get a better idea of how to help him. When I went to do so, though, his tone immediately changed. He started speaking in this monotone voice and had this kind of dead stare. I'd never before seen eyes so devoid of all emotion. Not to mention, he had no signs of physical injury or any distress at all. Obviously, I was freaked out, but tried my best to carry on normally, asking him more questions. After the first 2, he just stopped answering completely though, and only continued to stare at me. I tried repeating myself, but now he was just eyeing me like a wild animal. At this point, I was starting to get pretty fed up with his behavior. "Alright, well, I'm just gonna call 911 to get you help." He then started to get all frantic, going between begging me not to call and saying, "They won't let me go. I can't go back there." I told him I had no idea how to help him. If he wouldn't let me call emergency services, he needed to leave right now. He didn't seem to even need medical assistance in the first place. This guy went right back to ignoring everything I said and just staring at me. Honestly, I should have called the police right then and there, but I was overwhelmed by this man, and getting the police involved was always a last resort for me. Alright, well, you can wait there for 20 minutes and try to find alternative transportation, but then you really need to go. I went into the back to watch him on the cameras, from where I was safer. 20 minutes went by. I came out to tell him to leave, but then he just started yelling nonsensically. I went into the back once more. The man waited there for 2 more hours. Finally, I told him I was calling the police, to which he replied, "Well, if you're going to do that, I'll just leave then." It was almost comical at this point. Please do so. I've wanted that this whole time. I was so done with him that I was basically yelling. The man ran outside. I did call the cops and report him soon after. The freakiest part, though, is that while I was telling my boyfriend about this guy, he recognized him from my description of his blank stare. He pulled up this mugshot, and I could see he had charges for rape, aggravated sexual assault, and a bunch of other terrible shit. You see, my boyfriend worked at a homeless shelter for some years and had seen the guy from time to time. After that, I felt so lucky that he just left on his own. Who knows what would have gone down in different circumstances. I normally go walking in the woods with a friend, and today nobody was available, so I went by myself about 7 p.m. I parked the car and went into the entrance. There was one other car there, and a jogger who passed me on my way in. I decided to go off the main track. There's a smaller track about 10 to 20 meters down that you can follow instead if you wanted to. It's a wooded area, but you can easily get back to the main track in 5 minutes if you really want to. I was debating if I should continue on the smaller track, go straight and go back onto the main track, or go down into the more wooded area where there was a small pathway. So I'm just standing there trying to decide, when I see a man in the distance on the main track, walking toward the main entrance. At some point, the man seemed to notice me and stopped walking immediately. He was staring at me now, with a huge grin plastered on his face. He was in his 50s or 60s, and I was getting an extremely creepy vibe. My guts basically dropped out. I was thinking that if I walked back onto the main track, he'd be waiting there for me. If he stopped staring and continued walking the main track, we'd meet up later on, and nobody else would probably be there. I was thinking he would continue walking on, and I'd just wait a while for him to leave and go. I was feeling super unsafe, and regretting coming here all by myself. He ended up walking down the hill at a diagonal, while I saw he was still staring straight at me. He was making a beeline for me. I was now freaking out. I could only hope he was going to go down the other pathway. There was nobody walking the main track. I started walking faster. I noticed he was now doing a C shape, coming down to where I was standing previously. Now he was moving even faster and was right behind me. He wasn't exactly running, but his eyes were fixated on me. He was moving fast, and he'd been smirking ever since he spotted me. I was really freaked out now. I got a bit further, to an area which was covered by trees on each side. I mean, this man was clearly following me now, right? Why else would he reverse his own path and go exactly where I was now walking to? He was about 6 meters away from me now. I was getting ready to run back to the entrance, which would take about 5 minutes from where I was. He was walking further to the right, so he would cross paths with me on the main track. I was freaking out. He could easily grab me, or he could even have a weapon. I was too scared to take my phone out and be distracted. The fact he'd been following me so closely, without a single word, only hearing the leaves breaking under his boots behind me in the woods while stalking me, was terrifying. At that point, though, a couple spontaneously appeared. I was quite relieved. They were going really fast, so I was worried they'd just pass by me easily, and the man would start chasing me after they left. My car doors don't lock properly, and sometimes the engine stalls as well since it's an old shitter. I was freaking out that might happen once I arrived back to my car. The man stopped in his tracks though, after seeing that couple. I took the opportunity and began moving so fast. He was now moving super slow behind me, still staring, still sticking to the wooded areas, and doing that predatory stare for 10 minutes, fixated on me. When I got back to my car, I started it up and drove slowly by so I would be able to identify him properly. He didn't come out though until I was way down the road. I'm now wondering if I should have stayed parked and gotten a picture of him or something, or recorded him on video, and told him I would report him for following me. Maybe I should have told the couple I was being followed. I drove away super shaken up, and the man was gone from my life forever. I can't even describe the feeling. All I can remember is his creepy smirking face and really gray hair. I'm definitely lucky I managed to get out of there. I'm so furious that I can't even go for a short walk on a hiking trail without being in danger. I can't even imagine what would have happened if I'd met him further down into it. I've wanted to post this story for years, and now I finally have a way to share it. This is going to be a long read, but I'll tell you about the scariest experience of my life. I was 15 years old, living in a medium-sized city in North Florida. About 60,000 people or so, but some areas were really spread out and rural. Don't think of it like New York City or anything. More like a lot of houses spread out over a huge area, with a condensed shopping center here and there. I was a bit of a punk that my parents had a hard time controlling, so that meant I basically snuck out constantly and was always riding my bike around the city all hours of the night with my friends, fighting and constantly causing trouble. For reference, I was probably about 5'10" and 150 pounds around this time. My next-door neighbors were my best friends. Let's call them Nick and Tim. Nick was the younger, and probably 5'5" and 140 pounds. Tim was 5'8" and easily 210. They were brothers and only a year or so apart. On that night, Tim had texted me around 1 a.m., asking me to go ride with him and his brother to his girlfriend's house so he could try and get lucky. I remember being very hesitant because of how long the ride was. I looked it up and it was about 10 miles from my house to her street. But Tim begged and begged me to go until eventually I agreed. Our city had a curfew, meaning any police in the area that saw you and assumed you were a minor would stop you and possibly issue a ticket and bring you home. That meant we had to be careful about being seen by any cars going by. Well, the bike ride to her house went by without any issues. We took our time, joked around, smoked a little pot, and genuinely enjoyed the ride together. We ran out of what little pot we had on the way, and finally got to his girlfriend's house after what felt like an hour. Tim snuck around the back to go in, and Nick and I just sat near the electrical box and talked. Maybe 30 or so minutes went by, and Tim triumphantly snuck out of the house, bragging about his time in there. He said we should head back home now. Annoyed at how long we'd been waiting there, and nearly sober now, we both agreed. The first mile of the ride back went fairly smoothly, but soon after, things changed. We had just passed a decent-sized shopping area, which was obviously closed, and a church. We rode by slowly, in zero rush at all. After we passed, it led to a long stretch of road, with woods and canals on each side. 2 lanes on each side separated by palm trees and landscaping in the middle. We were riding on the right-hand sidewalk, when off in the distance we saw a very tall older man, wearing a yellow raincoat and a large backpack. He was just pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, under a street light on the corner of the parkway and side street. We all went silent as we got closer. I don't think he could see and hear us from that far away, as there were no lights over us and there were sprinklers going off in the median as well. I remember hearing him dragging his feet across the ground, clearly mumbling something to himself. He was dragging his feet almost like he was trying to brush away the concrete to find something underneath it. The mumbling was becoming more incoherent and frantic as we approached closer. Honestly, it made my stomach knot up and my heart sink in my chest. I couldn't understand anything he was saying, mind you. The only way to get home, though, was to go right by him. "Hey, why don't we cross the street and go another way?" Tim and I agreed. I remember this so distinctly. As we crossed the landscaped medium, a jet of sprinkler water hit me directly in the face and got in my mouth and eyes. It smelled horribly. We could now hear the mumbling and scraping of his feet much clearer. I could make out more details about him as well. He was smoking a cigarette, probably 6'5" or so. He had this huge backpack on and was extremely skinny, really long gray hair, wearing combat boots and ripped jeans. He had a full white beard, almost kind of like Gandalf or something. He didn't seem to notice us until we were directly across from him. We all had our eyes locked in his direction when he suddenly stopped moving altogether. He stopped talking, stopped scraping his feet. All of a sudden, he just looked up from the ground and let out this god-awful screech. It was like he was screaming 100 words at once. None of us knew what he was trying to say, obviously. After the initial scream, though, I could make out one thing. "What the fuck are you doing?" It startled us. We were now only 25 yards away from him. When he turned to look at us, it was obvious he was addressing us. "What the fuck are you looking at?" I was a foolish teenager. I piped up trying to say something smart when Tim grabbed my mouth and said, "Don't say a fucking word." I didn't. I kept quiet. In hindsight, I'm glad I kept quiet. The man kept screaming in our direction as we rode past him. The further we rode, the fainter the screaming got, and then it stopped altogether. We crossed the street again to the other side and made it about a mile down the road, all of us now on edge. We kept glancing over our shoulders constantly to make sure the man was not following us or something. We talked briefly about it, how strange that was, but we were glad it was over with. Or so we thought. Nick and Tim were riding in front of me, when suddenly I thought I could hear something from behind me. I turned around, and there he was only an arm's length away, rushing directly for me. The yellow raincoat was pulled up over his head and buttoned to hide his face. The man was standing up on his mountain bike, pedaling insanely fast. We locked eyes, and he just started screaming, and I mean fully screaming. Not even words, not any language, just a constant howling scream, as loud as he could. I get the chills even writing this down now. If someone ever illustrated an image of that moment and I saw it, I'd have a panic attack immediately. I screamed to everyone else, "He's right behind us!" We started pedaling as hard as we could. He was right behind us the whole time though, still screaming. Every so often he would catch right up to us, screaming and trying to knock us off our bikes with an attack. I don't know how long we rode with him chasing us, but it felt like an eternity. I think age played a huge factor in the end though, because he eventually got tired and we started to ease ahead a bit. Exhausted, we pulled into a random neighborhood and started cutting through yards trying to lose him. We jumped off our bikes and all just decided that if he was still chasing us, we were going to make a stand together and fight him. It was like a hive mind decision. We were all too tired to keep going, so this was our only option. We waited and waited for him to come to us, but he didn't come. I don't even remember hearing him anymore. I guess somehow we'd lost him. I called my house phone, waking both my parents up in the process, and told my dad about the situation. He told me to get home and figure it out myself. I asked to talk to my mother, and she yelled at me on the phone and refused to pick us up, as I stood there in the middle of the street, hoping this crackhead didn't come back and kill us all. I got home with Nick and Tim in tow, who asked if they could crash in my room. Of course, I said yes. I think we all have some weird feelings about that night, and we never really spoke of it again. I don't know what he wanted, and clearly he was on drugs, but it makes me wonder, would he have robbed us or done something worse if he'd caught up to us? I was driving home from house sitting in another city. It usually takes me about 6 hours to do this drive on my motorcycle because I have to pull over regularly to massage feeling back into my butt and stretch my legs a bit. I left around 11:30 a.m. and happened to miss a weather alert with thunderstorm warnings along my route. This road takes me through mountain passes with a lot of hairpin turns. The normal speed is 80 kilometers per hour, and a couple of these turns have posted speeds going as low as 30. It started hailing and pouring rain, full-on thunderstorm weather. I was doing my best to keep the speed limit while also being safe. There was nowhere to pull over and just wait it out, not many passing lanes in the mountains. On the last hairpin turn, I slowed down to take it at the posted speed when this huge truck, who'd been behind me for about 15 minutes, pulled into the oncoming lane, illegally mind you. They sped up next to me, laying on the horn thick. It was a blind corner. He saw oncoming traffic coming right at him. Instead of doing the smart thing and slowing down to get back behind me, he decided to gun it. If I hadn't downshifted immediately when I realized he was going to do this, he would have nailed me with the 30-foot trailer he was dragging behind him, sending me flying off the cliff next to us. The next town was about 20 minutes away. I pulled into a gas station to dry out a little and calm down after what just happened. I watched the man calmly drive away like nothing ever occurred. About 2 hours later, I pulled into a fruit stand to grab a snack and take a well-deserved break. This was now 3 towns further down the highway, mind you. Lo and behold, somehow that exact same guy was there. He saw my motorcycle and pulled in to have a go at me. He screamed at me that he was about to teach me a lesson for slowing down on the highway to the posted speed limits for safe turns, mind you. When I asked him what he would have done if he'd killed me, he told me it would have been my own fault, and he would have laughed as I went flying over the cliff. We got into a scuffle, but that was about it. I really hope I don't ever run into that guy on the road again. What a crazy asshole. About 3 years ago, I, 21 and female, was a waitress during the height of COVID. It was my first ever job, and I remember being excited to start as soon as possible. After all my training was finished and I got my certifications, I was put on the closing shift. We closed at 10 p.m. every night at the same time. Typically, it was just the cook, 20s and male, and I. Rarely would there be another waitress with me, and I sorta liked it that way. I always worked better alone, and didn't really get along with most of the other waitresses anyway, so it was quite nice and peaceful. I can remember it was near the end of my time there that this experience happened, and I'm really happy I had the circumstances I did at the time. I never was one to really trust my gut very much. I have mild anxiety, and I couldn't tell if what I felt half the time was valid or not. I mention this because when this all went down, it felt real, and I had an absolute feeling. I had started my shift that evening around 3 p.m. or so. I said goodbye to the last waitress sometime later, and I was on my own with my cook now. Everything was pretty slow and normal, until I got a call about one of the specialty items on the limited time menu we had. The food couldn't be ordered as takeout, and the lady over the phone really didn't take that well. After a bit of debating, she decided to finally sit in and eat instead. I'd say around 10 minutes later is when I spotted an older-looking car pull up and 3 people climb out. 2 men and a woman who looked to be in their 30s to 40s. I could tell it was the very same lady I'd spoken to over the phone, judging by her attitude coming in. I further confirmed it by asking, since I already had a pretty good idea of what she wanted to eat. What I thought was an act of mild embarrassment and pettiness turned out to be something much more sinister later on. Her attitude toward me changed immediately once she saw me. She was much nicer and more cooperative. This didn't ring any bells at first, because it was something that most people who wanted to look good in front of others would do. I sat them down at a booth and took all their orders. I noticed they had this red binder and a black pen as well. I then went to tend to the other customers, as there were a couple of other tables I was waiting on too. Once I brought their food out to them, they asked me if I knew any realtors. I found this to be pretty normal, as this was a tourist vacation state. It wasn't uncommon for outsiders to be looking for getaway homes here. I would say this was a pretty reasonable assumption, as they didn't look like the unsavory type of people, if you get what I mean. Nonetheless, I gave them the phone number to a realtor I knew closely, and well, since I often went to church with her, there wasn't really any other notable interactions with them. There was some occasional small talk if I wasn't doing anything or if I was refilling their drinks or something. It was around 4:30 now, and they were the last of my tables to leave the restaurant. If any of you work in the food industry, you know that as a server, you don't really get breaks. Just lunch most of the time. Sometimes not even that if it's super busy all day. My cook and I took this as an opportunity for a well-deserved break then. We walked out behind them and had a small chat. I should mention by now that the front of the restaurant had a disabled ramp coming up the doors. It was long because the building was on a raised foundation. I didn't really notice it at the time, but one of the men took my cook to the other side of the ramp down near the end and started chatting with him over a cigarette. I was behind the railing at the top of the platform where the ramp plateaued. The other man and the woman were on the other side of the railing, about 5 feet below in front of me. We were talking about some random thing, and they started to ask some personal questions, such as if I lived in the area, if I smoked weed, how old I was. I hadn't quite learned yet that telling strangers such things wasn't a good idea. However, for some reason to me, this was starting to raise some red flags. I gave some very vague answers to all her questions best I could. They still persisted in trying to have some sort of communication with me outside my work though, no matter if I said no or not. I suppose they finally realized I wasn't going to give any more personal information up. So, the woman finally got to her point. She told me that she had some business to offer me, a cleaning service. I don't like cleaning anyway, so regardless, I would have said no. However, what she said next really solidified my answer. She proceeded to tell me she owned this maid service called the Pretty Kitties Service. She said she needed pretty young girls like me, and she had 10 right now. She wanted to expand the business. She mentioned they got paid $30K but didn't specify the length of time and how it would be a really great opportunity for me to help her with her business. I instantly knew something was off here and that I was in danger. However, I didn't understand just how much danger I was in. I politely declined her offer and told her I liked my job as it was. I was very satisfied where I was working right now. She tried to further convince me by telling me how easy the work was and reiterating how much I'd make under her supervision. She mentioned something about the car for her business and told me to follow her to her car. She said she'd show me a picture of something. I knew for certain I was not going anywhere near her or near that car though. I declined yet again and said I was fine right where I was. I said she could show me on her phone whatever she needed to, but suddenly she was now hesitant. She proceeded to end the conversation immediately and bolted off with the two men. A little weirded out, I walked back into the restaurant with my cook and told him about what I'd just experienced. He joked about how I'd have good money if I went along with them. Because I didn't take the situation as seriously as I should have, I laughed with him. At the end of the night, when the cook's grandmother came to pick us up, I mentioned that weird interaction. A panicked look came over her and she sat silent, staring at me. I got confused and asked her if everything was okay. And that's when I learned the signs of human trafficking. She broke it to me that I was almost trafficked, and I was incredibly lucky I didn't get kidnapped. My stomach dropped, and I panicked at the realization of just what was going on. Now, remember that red binder and black pen earlier? I went to work the next day and a customer walked in. Now, normally in my part of town, not many people like to sit and relax for a while. They're mostly there to just eat and leave, as it wasn't exactly a cafe. I went to get into my apron and sit this gentleman down. He was well dressed and alone. I sat him at a single booth and took his order of a single coffee. He had a red binder and black pen with him. I didn't even notice until my cook from the night before reminded me of it. I was shocked to see the exact same thing there. It unsettled me even more when he proceeded to just sit there for 3 hours, watching me the whole time. I kept asking him if he needed anything, but he didn't respond to me. I just sort of shrugged and went on with my business. Now, this might surprise some of you, but us servers, believe it or not, do listen in on some conversations. I'm lucky I did with this particular one. I remember him speaking over the phone about finances and how he needed to find another house. He spoke about moving money and how he was going to pay his girls that night. I ran to the back of the kitchen and told the cook. Thankfully, he came out with me to help deliver some plates in order to throw the guy off. He ended up leaving not long after my cook appeared, and I haven't seen or heard anything since. This happened a few years ago around mid-November. My mother and I loved being outside and going for walks. This night in particular was freezing, but we decided we wanted to go out for a quick walk anyway. As we walked back home, we went down this one street that we used all the time. It was a neighborhood street that led back to the main street, then into our neighborhood. We got about halfway down the street when I heard a dog bark over the music on my phone. I turned it off and started looking around. I love dogs, and I wasn't aware there was a dog on this area of the street. For some context, I knew just about everyone in the neighborhood, and I knew which houses had dogs as well. Most of the people on the block had cats. This came from a house that didn't have a dog, let alone a big one. I happened to spin around to look, and saw a dark mass just feet away from me. If they'd stepped 2 more feet, they would have been able to easily grab me. I felt a sudden surge of danger and started speed walking back to my mom, who at that point I didn't realize had stopped altogether. I turned off my phone and whispered to her that somebody was following us. She turned around and grabbed my arm. She told me there wasn't just one person. There were 2 men following us from different directions. We started to move through a zigzag pattern, and sure enough, they followed our every step. Once they caught on that we knew they were following us, one of the dudes called out and tried to start chit-chat with us. "Awfully late for you two to be out walking alone, huh?" I swear, his voice sounded like the definition of a siren's voice or something, the kind that lures sailors to their doom. He continued calling out to us. My mom kept walking and replying with quick replies. From the sound of his voice, though, I could tell we were in danger. I went to call 911. Instead, my mom told me to call my dad, as he would be able to get there quicker because we were almost home already. We got onto the busy street and looked behind us to see them catching up on us easily. We decided to risk it and ran into the middle of the street as cars passed on either side of us. We ran across again and met my dad on the other side. When we looked across the street, though, both men were already gone. We hopped into the car and searched the streets, but these guys had disappeared into what seemed like thin air. I asked my mom what would have happened if I hadn't heard that dog barking, and she asked me, what dog? I asked her how she hadn't heard that massive dog bark, especially with how good her hearing usually is, but she said there was nothing at all. I still have no clue what it was I heard in that moment, but I do know that sudden coincidence just happened to save my life.